The following presentation was recorded live for the International Association of Square Dance Callers 19th Annual Convention. We take you live to Virginia Beach, Virginia, where our session is just getting underway.
A couple guidelines here. No smoking in here, please. And we're going to do a question and answer type thing at the end, I hope. But if you have a question that's burning your body and can't stand, maybe the time to ask it is when the formation is there or whenever the site resolution is done, that you can ask a question of our panel. I'd like to say that I believe that site resolution can expand your horizons as well as give a dancer many more hours of dancing pleasure. If you're not a site caller, then this may open up all kinds of new doors for you. If you are a site caller, I'm sure that you'll learn like I will. And in my opinion, site calling doesn't follow any particular rule or restriction, and it's only limited by your imagination and how well you can snap out of it. Most of us that site call use our own method. As I found, each one of these have their own method of doing site calling and the way they get in and get out. Before you try a particular site resolution type of evening, if you're just not getting into it, perhaps you should push the checkers a little bit and just see how great that is to get out of maybe something and resolve the set. Okay? I suggest you develop your own method. Anyhow, on my left here, from the great state of New York, he's a member of CALLERLAB since 1974. He's been calling since 1956. He teaches a beginner's lessons each year, and he calls through the C4 program. He has authored many square dance figures. Many of those figures are part of our existing programs, and just some of those are scoot back, recycle, chase right, linear cycle, coordinate, and chain reaction on the advanced level. He's been instrumental in a lot of things that we do from a different way of looking at things, I guess is what I want to say. And some of his presentations at CALLERLAB are well remembered. And Lee's been gone from our conventions for a while, for whatever reason. And I'd personally like to thank Mr. Lee Kopman from New York back to CALLERLAB, and he'll be one of your presenters. On Lee's left is the last one to send in his resume. I'd like to make that known right now. I got it at the convention. And anyhow, this gentleman's from Virginia, by way of Kentucky, if I remember my logistics right. He started dancing in 1962 at the age of 10? You sure that's not 20? Okay, 10. And he started calling in 1971, and he went full-time caller in 1979. He calls all levels mainstream through C4. He's called in many, many states, and he's on the staff of most major advanced and challenge festivals. He has an interesting philosophy. I've tried to read a couple of things he's written that this guy writes real funny too, over here on my right. But he wrote a couple articles I appreciated. Mike Jacobs. On the right-hand side is a guy that made all them L302XYs and you know what I mean. And he's been on CALLERLAB since 1970 also, 74 like Lee also. He's been calling for 37 years. He teaches beginners class, calls through the C1 program. Bill has authored many figures. He has written several books and magazine articles. He has a note service that does very well. He's developed a complete symbol system for depicting choreo states. That came right out of your resume. I could never said that. Which a lot of us are still wondering about. Bill has a PhD in engineering and recently retired from Lockheed Space Systems. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bill Davis. I know you're going to get a lot out of this. We're going to ask that Mr. Davis begin the program, and then we'll come along with the other two. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. First of all, I'd like to ask one other question of the folks out here. How many here do not site call currently. So it looks like most of us understand the concept of the idea of site calling, so we're not going to spend too much time on that, but we'll, by virtue of just what we do, we'll spend some time on it. We've, over the years, developed techniques for getting the first steps underway, and we're going to talk then about resolution. And so because you all do some now, site calling, we're probably going to proceed on with a little more than you would see in the very beginning type exercise on site calling. We've got at CALLERLAB, we've accepted things that describe the overall setup, and they're related to resolution and other things. We've talked about formations, we've talked about arrangements and sequence, relationships, those kind of things. In site resolution, we are involved in what I call the relationship and sequence aspect of what is, in a broader sense, extemporaneous calling. Although there are some people, some callers, that are very effective in all formations and arrangements, most callers, and Kip Garvey and myself did a couple of surveys, and actually a couple of years ago, some of you may have participated in a cross-section examination of how people resolve. And it turns out that for most people, when they go to resolve, after having done a certain amount of extemporaneous calling, got their particular thrust of their tip or the thrust of their sequence across, and they go to resolve, the first thing they do is resolve what we would call the arrangement aspect. In other words, the arrangement, for those that aren't quite familiar with it, refers to, and I'll use a facing line as an example, the arrangements are, in a facing line, you can have six different arrangements. One of those arrangements is the normal arrangement. So the first thing that most callers do is they'll take whatever they have at the time they decide to resolve and get that arrangement to normal. They will establish a normal arrangement. Most will do that. Then they will get, the next thing they will do is get into a formation that's a familiar to them, workable formation. And that formation, we've found, for most people, is two face lines, facing lines, 8 chain throughs. Those are probably the most popular. And then they also use other formations, double pass-through and quarter tags, perhaps. So they resolve, in the overall resolve process, will go from arrangement, from whatever, to a zero or normal arrangement. We'll go to a familiar formation next. And then most people, we found, in the resolution process, most people went to the first thing they resolved after that. I should say the third thing, the next thing after the arrangement and formation. The next thing they resolved was relationship. And you can see why that's a very convenient, if you've done much, you can see why that's a very convenient and comfortable way to proceed. Because relationship involves who is dancing with who. And one of the easy things for most people to pick up on is partners. And so relationship resolution involves getting partners paired up or some knowledge of the relative location, if you will, of the partner in the set. For example, in a two-face line, the callers will typically go to two paired and two not paired, or everybody paired in a two-face line. Then they'll proceed from there with their get out or whatever resolution process that they have in mind. So just reviewing that, fix arrangement first, then get the right formation, then get some kind of partner pairing that you recognize. And we're going to be demonstrating that. We have some squares here, a square with some pin-on things. We're going to help you see what we're getting at. After relationship, the final thing that most callers do is resolve the sequence. And the sequence, of course, is going to be, once you're in a normal situation, there's 4 possible sequences, and they'll go to some final situation. The sequence has got to be everybody in sequence. That's the last thing you can do before either an Alaman left or a right and left grand or leave them at home. Any one of those things, the sequence has to be right. That is usually the last thing they resolve, that most of us resolve. Now, that's not the only way to go, by any means. But I think our analysis of that from a nationwide, well, when I say nationwide, it was a CALLERLAB-wide thing, and we had about, I think that evening, we had guys from all over the country, and we had about 20 guys get up and do their thing without any rehearsing or anything else. It was an ad hoc meeting, and I would say that out of the 20 guys, all but about one, maybe two, did it in exactly that order. Exactly that order. That was the process, and it was about the same for everybody. So if you're doing that already, you're doing what most people do. Now, beyond that, and since all of you do it, I think that the thing that we're probably going to concentrate on mostly here today is what do you do after you've got there, or something close to that? What do you do instead of just square through 3/4 and allemande left? Are there other things? Well, of course, you all know there are other things, and these things, depending on how frequently you see them, may appear to be good standard stuff, or they may appear to be clever or very clever. And how do guys set those up? How do we see what it is? How do we see how we set up our particular thing? That's the thing we're going to be talking about, I think. So what we tell folks in our caller schools, when we get to this part, we say a good thing, if you want to expand your repertoire of get-outs, is to research them. See what other guys do. Write your own. Get the checkers out. There's just no substitute for that. If you understand what's going on, which understanding you get by moving the checkers, then you can do a lot of things. If you see, for example, someone doing a little thing and all of a sudden, bang, you got the answer, it's either a right and left grand or you're at home, or it's an allemande left that you weren't expecting to see. What I say is, you can go up and ask the guy, but better is to say, I know, I'll write down or I'll remember the last thing he did before he did the get-out. I'll go back and move backwards from that particular, what I'll call get-out, move backwards to a, if you will, relationship, that is who's with what partner, and sequence that I can recognize on the fly. If I have to go all the way back to facing lines, everybody with partners in sequence, I may have to remember 5 calls. If I can go back to a situation with everybody facing their partner, I may only have to go back 3 calls. Or if I can go back to a situation where everyone's in a 2-face line, 2 with partners and 2 with not, I may only have to go back 2 calls. And you have to decide that for yourself. What is it you can recognize? If you got one that says, well, it's going to take me 7 calls, and I would like to have, but I passed the situation that I realize people will look at and recognize, it's only 3 calls back, it's probably going to be worth your while to put that particular thing on your list of things to learn. I want to get to the point now where I can recognize this situation. I can recognize right ends paired, left ends not paired in a facing line, and then know that I've got that in a pigeonhole now. I can do a lot of things with that, and I add one more. But if you don't have that to begin with, if you don't see yourself recognizing that, you have to learn that. And the best way, I think, is to write it down. Remember, might even make out a little program card for right ends paired. What are the different things? And I find one more that I can do from there. Give that thing a name. You can use a symbol system if you want, but don't worry about a symbol system. If you've got something that's going to identify that particular thing, the thing I would use, for example, I would say right ends paired, everybody facing corner. That's the thing that I have in my head on that particular setup. It's got a symbol also. I don't use the symbol in real-time calling. I use a symbol in my note service if I want to communicate that to other people. But I don't use a symbol system in real time. I use sight recognition things that are primarily related to partner pairings. And then, for this relationship aspect, and then sequence derived by, in addition to the partner pairing, the corner relationship to your pivot man. We'll be talking about pivot man. If someone doesn't understand that, what we're talking about when we talk about pivot man, just raise your hand now and I'll say a little about it. But if you do, let's not waste time, because everybody understands what we mean by a pivot man. A couple people don't. If in sight calling resolution, what you have to know is the location of usually four adjacent people in the set. And with symmetric choreography, knowing those 4 takes care of the whole set for you. So if you have 4 people, typically it's an L-shaped operation. L-shaped operation. So you got 4 people, 1, 2, 3, 4 people involved. The pivot man is the center man of those 4, typically. And the pivot man has a partner, and the pivot man has a corner, and the corner has a partner. You have to know all 4 of those. So when we talk about pivot man, if we do, and to the extent that we do, pivot man is that center man. For example, if it's the number 1 couple and number 4 couple, the pivot man is the number 1 man, and the number 4 lady is his corner. Some people at points in time have said, well, gee, you know, they've done a lot of things, and they find out, they think that they don't have to know the pivot man's corner's partner. In other words, in this case, it would be the number 4 man. Well, they're wrong. You do have to know that. And if you want to just run a little example in your mind, just imagine that the side couples in starting did a flutter wheel, and now you squared the set and went from there. You wouldn't know from just those 3 people what your resolution, the correct resolution would be. So you must know those 4. The pivot man is typically, not always, but typically the center man of that group of 4. So, if you now have a setup that you found has a lot of good little action from it, like, for example, right ends paired, everybody facing a corner, then put that in your memory. Now, a lot of guys will remember that, not by that particular thing. They'll see it all in a flash. They'll see that's the arrangement. They may not even articulate that it's right ends paired, everyone facing a corner, but they'll in essence, if you ask them now what that is, they may say, well, that's the curly cross get out to a right and left grand. And they will put everything in that pigeonhole, if you will. And the guy says, well, curly cross, what's that? Oh, well, all right, we're in the plus program, or the mainstream program, that's touch a quarter, boys shake left hands and pull by. And so that's another thing that you put in that same little pigeonhole. And then as you see other things that you can do there, like pass the ocean, recycle, and Alabama, you'll put that in there. Get those. Make little program cards for yourself for these various recognizable, just before get out setups. That's a very, very powerful thing. Once you do that, don't try and put a whole bunch of them together in your program. Use one of them for a week or 2. Get to know that setup. Get to know that setup. Then you will own it. But you're not going to own it, I don't think. Maybe some guys can, but in my case, if I see a little thing that I can now recognize and I'm comfortable with it, and I put 4 things in there, and I try and use them all at once, and never having used them before, I'm going to get a little bit in trouble there, possibly. So I don't try and do a bunch of them at once. You'll be surprised how fast you can increase your repertoire by doing one new one every 2 weeks, or even one new one every week if you really want to go for it. Or one every 4 dances, or some other thing that allows you to work one of them with a concentrated effort for some time till you've got it really nailed down. Now you can add others by, instead of identifying the setup with a name, you can say, oh, that's the touch a quarter one, or whatever, that goes into a right and left. You put it, and you can name the pigeonhole now, if you will, with that name, with a call name, or with a get out name, or with the one you're most familiar with. You can name it that way. That's a memory hook that allows you then to do the following. Once you've learned that and put it in place, now you're calling a dance, or you're calling a tip, and you've done some things that you want to do, but all of a sudden, you've got 12 squares out there, and all of a sudden, 3 squares are in trouble. And you think, well, you know, rather than try and pick them up, I've done what I want to do, I'm going to get out fast. And you're looking at the dancers, and bang, that one comes up, you put it in right there. You don't think about it anymore, you put that little get out in, and now everybody's back to 0. You haven't had to worry about the 3 that are down or whatever. You've got them taken care of. You've got the other guys there, and now you can start over again. If you sensed what it was, there was a problem for these 3 squares, you can now come at that in a different direction, if you will, sort of teach them on the fly what you want done, and then repeat the process. Next time you come through, you may get the same setup again. You can use a different one in that box. And they'll think that you've been, even irrespective of what they think you've been doing or what your motivation is, they'll be happy with the fact that they've got a learning experience. You haven't done exactly the same thing. You are well prepared. And they recognize that. In whatever way you're well prepared because you You recognized what you had to do. You did it, but you did it in a slightly different way, with a slightly different twist, and that makes, people feel good about that. So I would say that one of the most important things you can do is you're moving on in your site resolution, which it looks like everyone here is, you're moving on, is to identify setups by some mechanism. I use partner pairings very strongly. Recognize those setups. Recognize a way to get sequence out of that too. I use corners. I use corners a lot. There are other things that when you've been calling as long as we have, all the fellows here on the stage, you develop a lot of other things too. You see a lot of things on the fly. The guy that's been calling 5 or 10 years may not even see him yet. He may not have been concentrating on this type of thing for 10 years. Even though you've been calling for 10 years, you may not have been doing this kind of thing for more than a couple of years. It takes time, gang. It really does. And you have to work the problem. You have to work the problem. You have to be aware. That's another thing you need to do. When I do a get out that I'm very familiar with, I never stop watching those people, though, because I could have been distracted, for example, to be charitable. I could have been distracted by something else, and I thought I was there, and I gave the get out, and away they go, and all of a sudden I look out there and I say, they're out of sequence. Or two of them have their partners, two of them know. What did I do? I screwed up somehow. But I know now, because I've been watching very carefully all the time, I know I got to fix it. Or at least I want to fix it. I want to fix it. So I'll take care of that. I'll go in real time and fix it if that's necessary. So those are the things that I consider the fundamentals, if you will, of doing site resolution beyond just Ferris wheel, center square, through 3/4, and Alaman left, which is one of the things you see quite a bit. And add on, but then of course you can even add on to that. So that's another thing you could do, is when you get into what we call a zero box, to have other things to do that come real quick, that are in your, if you will, program card for zero box get outs that you can do that expand on Alaman left. A lot of things you can do from there, because you're all in sequence, you're very close to your partner, you're very close to your corner, and so there's a lot of things that you can do with very short little deals. So that's another way, of course, to expand on your capabilities, and expand your repertoire, is to do those kind of things. They relate to the other. Remember what I said? One of the things you do if you see somebody else, you're doing your research, you see somebody else do something that's cute, and you find, well, it's very short back to a zero box. I'll usually go for that. Because if I want to now make it happen, so-called engineer that, make it happen, then I know I can get there pretty handily. It's never more than 2 or 3 calls away once you're normal. Once you're normal, a zero box is never more than, say, 3 calls away. At most 4. But most of us can do it in 3 or less. So if I can get there quickly, then I can, particularly while I'm learning the new things on that thing, I can get there quickly. I'll get there, and I'll use that little get out. And so now I'm building up a repertoire of things I can do from that zero box. And so you should, for those very easy to recognize setups, zero box, zero lines, you should have a lot. You should have several get outs that come to your mind right away, that you're very familiar with. If you don't have several, that's probably the first way to grow. That's probably the first way to go. Get several from those very easy ones. I suspect if you've been calling a while, as most of you say you have doing site resolution, you already have a few from each one of those. So then the next step is to do what I just mentioned previously. Get other setups that you can recognize quickly, that you can move to quickly, or that you can even better see on the fly as you're going through and for whatever reason want to come to a get-out situation. You can see that on the fly. Okay? Any questions about the concept that we're talking about here? Does that sound about right for what you guys want to know more about? Is anybody out there? Okay. All right. That's the end of my sort of introduction to this thing, and we're going to get to the guys who are going to give you some stuff out there on the front. Hello? I think that I caught a catchphrase there that we all do, not site resolution, but site recognition. And when I got to thinking about that, that's what I do every time. When I decide it's time to get out, I recognize what I've got and work from there. So that's important. And
Bill told me in a meeting last year or 2 years ago about this curly cross. It's actually the right-hand couple paired and their corner's not in the same line that they're in. That's a L30 or a curly cross position, and that sounds funny, but I remembered all three of them now, see, so I can talk fluently with whoever I'm talking with, in three different languages. And but anyhow, that's important because I started using that as a sight recognition, and it's helped me tremendously, and I need it a lot. Okay, you ready for your square? Okay. Lee Kopman, Mike Jacobs. Let's give Bill a big hand for his presentation also.
Can we have just couples 1 and 3 come up first, okay? 2 and 4 could just move right up here to the first row here, so when we're ready for you, come up and join
While
us.
they're getting up, I'd like to make one overdue.
Are we doing this together? Or what?
I hope so.
Okay.
You know, one thing that Keith said, there was a little bit of terminology he used there, and that's something I'm bothered with the whole issue of sight calling, and that is when it's time to get out. That's not really a good philosophy. Crisis-oriented sight calling is not the best approach to sight calling. Controlled sight is the best approach. When you need to get out, it's because you made the decision to get out, and not because the dancers, by having a disaster on the floor, made the decision for you to get out. You need to be controlled.
It's not easy to learn how to sight call, but it's easy to practice the calling itself. And there are a lot of things that you have to build into your own memory and mental imagery, which we're going to get to in a minute, which I think will help you so you can become fluid in how you deliver your material. Now, if you are a sight caller now, this might be good for you to look at also, especially if you're really marginal at it. So many times I do clinics all over the country, and I ask a group, how many people here sight call? Everybody raises their hand, and then we say, well, come on up and show me, and they really can't do it as well as I would like them to do it. Now, here's what I tell them in terms of practicing. If you want to practice sight calling, if you're not a sight caller, first of all, you should be, because there's just too much material to deal with. And if you are a sight caller, it makes you more flexible in how you give the material. It's exciting for you. It keeps you interested, and it keeps the dancers interested in terms of the variety of material you can use. If I was to practice sight calling at the very beginning, I would have 2 couples over to your house, whatever, and I would present myself with a problem. And the problem I have is I want to be able to move these couples to the right 1/4, keeping their original partner. Example, join hands into your right, circle 1/4. This is my objective right here. Drop the hands to move them that way. Now go back again to where you were. But to use calls, very simple basic calls, without using that, as an example, I'm going to move them to the right, and this is what I'm going to be practicing. Using calls on the mainstream of the plus list or whatever. Pass the ocean, will you please? And recycle. Okay, so I moved them to the right. Now I'm not going to write that down. I wouldn't take the trouble to do it, because then my objective is to be able to watch these people and move them accordingly. I'm going to move them again to the right, but I don't want to use the same calls. Touch a quarter. Girls run around that guy. Star through. California twirl. Pass the ocean. Recycle. So I move them to the right, I move them here, there, and they retain their own partner. And then I might try it again, moving in one more position to the right, using other calls. Pass the ocean as an example. This is not memorized. It won't do me any good to memorize this. And if you're going to try to do these things and write them down and then say to yourself, well, I know how to move them to the right, you can either read it or remember it, then you're losing the advantage of being able to sight call and be fluid and extemporaneous when you're dealing with the calls. Swing through. Do a partner hinge. Boys run around that girl. Star through. Do a right and left through. Okay, we moved them 1 more quarter. A simple one, veer to the left. The other way. Are you kidding? Bend the line. Pass the ocean. Do a partner hinge. Girls turn back. So what I've done was I've moved them all the quarters here, retaining their own partners. Then you present yourself with another problem of doing the same thing to the left, using different calls. Then you create another problem where you move them to the right and you interchange girls. Example, star through. Do a right and left through. So we got him over here and he has a new partner. I'm going to move him to the right. I want to give him back his partner. Pass the ocean. Explode, star through. Square through 3. When you get there, do a partner trade. Now the thing about this is to physically watch them, to see where they're going and present the problem. Move them to the right, move them to the left, and you have to spit it out quickly. It's not the kind of a thing where you say, well, star through and then, well, no. Then maybe you ought to pass the ocean and then swing through. It doesn't work that way when you're calling. When you finally feel comfortable with this kind of a thing, then you can start to apply this to a square. And we're working with 4 here. Let's have the other couples come up, 2 and 4, okay? Steve, how'd you get there, Penny? You didn't have it to begin with. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Number 2 is here.
I thought that's why I'm here.
All right, now the application of the practicing of the 2 couples comes here. A lot of our calling is worked off the box 1-4. Is there anybody here that doesn't know what a box 1-4 is? Okay, have the head couples pair off. That's just moving the facial corner. Now, whatever you practiced with those 2 couples, at home or away or whatever, you can apply right here. We've done the square through 4, and what I'm going to do now is I want to get back to this position eventually in order to do an Allemande left. After a while, you get tired of saying swing through, boys run, Ferris wheel, and pass through, or whatever the case is. Sometimes the dancers get so used to those routines that I can't help but feel that they must be bored. In fact, there's a story about a caller who called for his group one time. He called it swing through, boys run. He had a coughing jag. He didn't finish, and the dancers automatically did a Ferris wheel by themselves and passed through to an Allemande left. Well, if that's the case, then something is wrong with how you're operating. At least that's the way I feel. But let's assume that you practice this thing just with 2 couples, moving them to the right, moving to the left. And then you finally get to your group and you want to resolve, but you want to do some good dancing right here. And we work with these 4 people just as you worked with the first and third. I'm going to move these 4 to the right. We're going to keep their partners. Pass the ocean. Recycle. I move them to the right. You must remember that that was your objective. Now I'm going to move them to the right. We're going to interchange girls. Touch a quarter. Girls run around that guy. Pass through. Do you turn back? I move them 1 more quarter to the right. Now this is all a result of practicing with just 1 and 3. I'm doing the same thing with 8 that we did with just 4. Now I'm going to move them again to the right, and what we're going to do is we're going to interchange girls here. Swing through. This is not memorized. If you're going to get involved with the memorize and not watch them. Now, I am watching them. I'm not looking right at them, but I know where 1 and 3 is and so on and so forth. I have good peripheral vision here, so I'm keeping an eye on them. Boys trade. Boys run around that girl. Bend the line. Star through. Veer to the left. Ladies trade. Bend the line again. I moved them once more here. I'm going to just get them back here again to the 0 position, which is the box 1-4. Keeping their partners again, using some different types of figures. Sometimes we don't use enough of what we had. You can also present a problem to yourself when you're practicing moving them to the right and to the left by saying, well, I'm going to do that without using star throughs or without using swing throughs. But you got to be careful because many of you will use the same thing all the time and not really get involved with, we have a lot of calls, I think, that are not used. I remember sitting for an hour at the National Square Dance Convention just a year ago in the Plus Hall. I didn't hear one circulate, and there must have been 15 or 20 callers called. I remember this guy right here calling at the National Square Dance Convention in Louisville. He was in the A2 hall. He calls the first tip, he comes off, he said, how was that? I said, that was terrible. He says, why? I said, you only called 3 or 4 calls off the advanced list. If you have the calls, use them. He got up the next tip, he called every call on the A1 and A2 list. It was terrific. Here, pass the ocean. Okay. Explode star through. Veer to the left. I'm watching them. My objective is to get them back to that box 1-4 position. Do a girls trade. Wheel and deal to face those 2. Pass to the center. In the middle, do a right and left through. Turn the girl. And the same 4, pass through, and then you're back to that position that we talked about. So what you do with 2 as heads, you can apply with 4 here. And the other thing is, instead of moving them to the right or to the left, then do right and left through equivalence. But don't memorize it, because then you're losing what your basic objective is. If we're going to do right and left through equivalence, and you want to work it out so that you lose the girl, then call figures of the swing throughs, the recycles, the linear cycles, whatever is there, use them in order to move these dancers around so they get the wind in their face and they feel like they're really being, to some extent, I know that challenge doesn't hit everybody the right way, but at least you're encouraging them to pay attention to what you have to say by having some variety in your calling. Veer left here. Bend the line. Let's go another step further, okay? That takes care of working with 4 on how you can start to develop some good sight calling techniques. The other thing that's really important with cycling techniques and resolving is to have a certain amount of things, pictures in your mind. I know that there are, you guys want to just move to the side here, just spread apart here. I know that when you think about, some of you memorize long sequences. I think somebody came up here yesterday, was it this morning? And he gave you a whole sequence of about 5 or 6 moves that culminated to an Allemande left. Well, if he comes into a dance and he's not feeling well, and he has that fixed to his memory, and he's not a good sight caller, and he forgets what the third line was, he's down the tubes. So there are certain mental imagery things that you have to have in your mind, certain pictures. What I'm saying to you is this. Instead of me memorizing 8 or 10 calls that will terminate to an Allemande left, I'll memorize a picture. Example, I'm going to pick on you, okay? If you have lines of 4, 1P, 2P, and you pass through and you wheel and deal, where is 2 in relation to 1? Okay, how many agree? How many disagree? All right, he said, if I said to him, if you have lines of 4 and you pass through and you wheel and deal, where is 2 in relation to 1? In front of him. That worked out perfect, by the way. Yeah, okay. We got it on tape, though. All right, the point is this. Rather than memorize a whole bunch of things for an Allemande left, which would be a standard routine procedure for you, which your dancers after a while will be able to finish without you even completing the call, memorize a picture. There are only about 10 of them that we really deal with. Example, the most primary picture is this, in your own mind. If the heads start through, can they square through 3 to an Allemande left? Yes or no? Okay. That's one way, or that's one position you're trying to cycle your dancers into a resolvable position. You know that position. That's a basic position. If the heads start through, pass through, and do a right and left through, one of the most common things that we use is pass through, trade by, Allemande left. That's another position that you can fix. If lines of 4 pass through and you wheel and deal, if you don't know immediately that 2 is in front of 1, memorize it. Put your checkers down. Take a look at the picture. This is 1 and 2. If you have lines of 4, 1P, 2P, and you pass through, bend the line. If you don't know that 4 is to the right of number 1, memorize the picture. Let me do this for you, and I really mean this, okay? Please close your eyes. While your eyes are closed, I'm going to give you some kind of a problem, and don't open them. If the heads square through 4, and then you touch a quarter, and the girls fold, who is behind gentleman number 1? Open them up. All right, number 4 is. Okay, now, that's a mental image that you have in your mind. You were able to do that. You can do that with lots of figures. If the lines of 4, 1 and 3 pass through and wheel and deal, and you immediately know that 2 is in front of 1, you're in great shape. Let's bring your square back here, okay? Watch how we do this. Square up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Will you please? Okay. Have the heads pair off. That takes the place of the square through 4. Touch a quarter. This is the problem I gave you before. Girls fold behind the guy. Lady number 4 is behind number 1. That's not hard. But while you're thinking about these things during lunchtime or while you're driving in your car, add another thing. Example. The girls do the fold. You know that she's behind him. Turn through, boys. Get back to your corner and you're looking right at her. Slide through. Okay. Girls trade. Do a wheel and deal to face those 2. Pass to the center. Square through 3 in the middle. Now, don't do the Allemande left, just square your setup. What we did was we added 2 or 3 other calls. Now, here's what I would like you to do when you leave this convention. If you can practice just a few of those things, don't write them down. And during the day, when you have some free time, think about a small sequence. Mentally imagine it. And then when you go back home, put your checkers down and see if it really works. If it works, fine. But don't write it down because then you'll start to read it and memorize it. That's the whole purpose of that's the objective we're trying to get to. For you to physically, or rather mentally, see some of these things. Here, you remember the things that we did where we had just had 2 couples? This is a critical thing. Have the head start through. What's the most critical thing that happened right now in terms of being able to choreograph and deal so that we can get to an Allemande left? What happened right now? They changed partners. Now, if you're not going to change partners, then you have to deal with cross-trail things and things like that. But this was critical, and you have to be aware of the fact that in order for them to square through 3, they had to change partners. Now, you must know that someplace that has to occur. And that when you're calling, that if you finally get to this position here, you're in great shape that you can do your square through 3 to an allemande left. Now watch how we extend on this, all right? Square your set here, okay? We're talking about 1P, 2P. Have the head couples lead to the right, circle up 4 and break to a line. Everybody slides out, but the CALLERLAB says to turn them under the arm. That's interesting. All right? Now, where is 2 in relation to 1 when you finally do a wheel and deal? Talk to me. They're in front. All right, let's pass through. Wheel and deal. 2 is in front of number 1, isn't that right? Okay, zoom. Now you must visually see that 1 is in front of 2. Do a right and left through in the middle. Can we square through 3 here to an allemande left? Because we didn't interchange the girls. But you remember those times when I told you to practice with 2 couples? You know, moving to the right and to the left? I have 2 couples in here that I want to play with for a while. And what we're going to do is I'm going to have you do right and left throughs with an interchange of a girl. Because I know now, as a result of the mental image, when you did the pass-through in your wheel and deal, 2 was in front of 1. I brought 1 into the middle. I did a right and left through, now 4 is right here. I have to interchange girls. So all those things I practiced with 2 couples, as an example. I'm going to move you to the left 1/4 and interchange girls without using a star through. That's bush for now, okay? Touch a quarter. Scoot back. Boys run around that girl. Just you 4, fan the top. Extend your tag. Okay, I'm in great shape. I used those calls that I practiced when I had 2 to have these 2 couples interchange partners and get to the couple behind them. Ladies straight. Recycle. Pass to the center. Square through 3, if you will. You could slide through here, couldn't you? Or you can do an allemande left. But as long as you know that some of these things can resolve to an allemande left, you can go 1 step further. And I probably would. Maybe you might get some ideas from this. This is the allemande left, isn't it? Okay. Instead of doing an allemande left, if you're looking for variety and you want to resolve here, but you want to extend it, slide through. Box the net. Square through 2. And don't do this, but you can do a grand right and left at this point here, which is kind of neat. Everybody turn around. Listen to what we did. Instead of doing a allemande left, look what we added, which is really neat. Slide through. Box the net. Square through 2. And don't do the grand right and left, but you're all set. Do a U-turn back. This stuff didn't just come to me, and I didn't memorize that, but I just based on what I'm watching at and looking at is what put me into a position where I can use some of these things. You have to be adventurous. You have to take chances. I wouldn't take a big chance at if you're a guest caller someplace and you're not too sure about the group. But the best place to take chances to try to develop good skills is at your home club. I don't want to do an allemande left here, so let's suppose we slide through. We can square through 4. But on the 4th hand, do an allemande left, which is really neat. All right, don't do it now. Just face the same people again. So now we're getting into the variety of things. And how do you develop the variety? By working with the 2 couples to begin with. And then you have to say, well, I'm going to try this. And if you always do, let's say, a touch a quarter, do that. After the head square through 4, and you scoot back, do that. Steve did this today. I didn't steal it from him. He learned it from me. But after the scoot back, you know, everybody's going to have the boys run, or a good part of you will have them run. You can have them fold, you can have them trade. Nobody used the hinge. You could have said hinge. You could have the boys fold and roll. And you can't get too lost because you're playing with your corner right here. Excuse the expression. You got it right here. Example, hinge. Boys fold behind the girl. Girls do a U-turn back. Star through with a girl. Everybody do a U-turn back. Square through 4. And then you're all set to do a grand right and left from there. Okay, now, you really, you know, I can give you this stuff. You can write it down from what we give to you, but it's not going to help your creative instincts at all. We all have some good basic creative instincts, but you have to develop it yourself. If you're going to take back home these things here, take back the idea on how you can practice and how you can research to do some different things. Now, when you're in the process of sight calling, and we get off the box 1-4 and you get out of the wheel and deal, there are some other things you should be aware of. Will you square your set, Mike? I'm almost finished. Okay, square up. Have the heads pair off. Let everybody slide through. I'll touch a quarter. When you start to call and you're looking for certain things to finally resolve, and you become adventurous, and you do things like have these centers trade, okay? And you have columns like this with 2 men and 2 girls, you have to be able to resolve this quickly. so you can get it back into a formation that's identifiable to you. Not so much your dances, but something that you will be comfortable with. And what you do in order to deal with this, you put your checkers down and you say, well, I have a column with 2 men and 2 girls. What are some of the possibilities for me to get into a normal situation? Don't do this. We can have the girls turn back, the girls can run, you can face your partner, quarter in, whatever the case is. So there are all kinds of ways to do this. But you really should know them instantly. It's not the kind of a thing where you have to research. Well, they're here, let me take a look at a book to see what I have to do to get out of this. These are instant things. And in order to build this stuff so that you can understand it, what you might do is take certain problems and spend a week, 2 weeks on it and say, well, I'm going to put him in this formation, and how am I going to resolve it so that it's a normal setup? Face your partner. Pass through. Okay, do a half tag. That's hard for some callers. Half tag. It's hard for dancers, and the reason it is because most of your half tags are done from 2-face lines. Here's another problem. You got 2 boys looking out. You can have the boys run. You can have them fold. I didn't hear anybody say fold and roll. Roll is a terrific step. Gives you lots of possibilities. Boys fold and roll. Okay, now if you want, the girls can touch a quarter. That's the closest hand. Don't do it. Or the girls can left touch a quarter. They'd have to reach in. But you have everybody's attention. It's not going to be that bad. Girls touch a quarter. You got a left-hand wave. Girls run around the guy, bend the line of 4. Why don't you pass through and then tag the line and turn to the right? An unusual formation. 2 are half sashayed and 2 are not. You put your checkers down and you say, now what are some of the possibilities on how I can get this into a normal situation? Well, don't do this. The centers can trade. You can bend the line and touch a quarter. You can see what some of these possibilities. Let's have the centers trade. Couples circulate. Okay, you can see if we bend, don't do this, if we bend the line and touch a quarter or the star through whatever, that we start to resolve or get into some kind of a normal situation where we can call them into those box 1-4s I told you about, or the position where you can square through 3 to an Allemande left, or pass through and trade by. The things that we use to get our end result to an Allemande left. Centers trade. Okay, everybody circulate. Centers walk and dodge. This is a 3-in-1 line. Most plus dancers don't deal with this kind of a thing, but it's possible to set this thing up. And there are ways to get out of this without too much of a problem. Do a partner hinge. That may be a problem in some cases for 2 boys, because most dancers are taught to do a partner hinge from a mini wave, not when you're both facing out. A partner hinge is a half a trade. It should be taught. I had a whole plan when I went to California at the National, when I was out there last time, to do something that involved partner hinges. And but that wasn't the basic step. And I go out there to call, I have lines of 4 facing out, and there was a bunch of people on the floor. I said, do a partner hinge, and we lost about 80% of the floor. We had to change the whole thing around and tell them that a partner hinge is a half of a partner trade. Boys, unhinge again, okay? Face out. Girls hinge. You can hinge, okay? This is the problem we're talking about right here, to do partner hinges. And you should really tell your dancers that a hinge is, as you get down the road, if you're getting involved in some advanced and challenge dancing, they should really know how to do the partner hinge. You guys feel smart today? Do a 1x3 walk and dodge. That's a good idea, isn't it? Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.
Well, of course, I need you to square your sets now, too. Of course not. All the heads star 3, please. Pass through and slide through. Past the ocean. What I just did here, and what Lee did a lot of, was showed you a lot of quick calls of maneuver dancers. But we have lots more on our list besides quick calls. There are calls that involve large patterns, but they reduce down to minimal movement of dancers. Now, for instance, let's take a large pattern call that's on the mainstream list called spin chain through. Spin chain through does one thing. It moves the 2 gentlemen that are on the end facing in across the square. It also happens to be in this particular arrangement, the 2 gentlemen we need to move across the other side of the square to line them up with the partners. Spin chain through, please. And you notice what we did with the arrangement. We simply matched up all the partners with each other. We took a call that was a large pattern call, and it did identically the same thing as Lee did with the smaller maneuver type calls. It allowed you more time to think and arrange dancers and move 2 across the setup. A large number of our pattern calls do the same thing. Boys run right. That's not it. Bend the line. Touch a quarter. We can use numerous formations other than the waves and the lines to maneuver dancers in order to resolve the setup. The key is maneuvering dancers across the center line of the square. Can I have a little more cord here?
You got to work from this side.
No, I'm...
You're okay, Mike.
Yeah. No. He goes left to right, I go right to left. When we work from here... When we work from this type of situation, the key is identifying the formation of 4, then who we want to maneuver across the center line of the formation of 8. Okay? Take a call like, very simply, all 8 circulate. Let's do the all 8 circulate. What happened? 2 girls moved from this box of 4 to that box of 4, and that's the key of the circumstance. We've changed the arrangement of the setup by maneuvering 2 people across the center line of the square. Boys run around the girls. What's more important is that we disguise it in a formation that dancers normally do not assume that you're going to resolve from, because they normally assume you're resolving from lines or from waves. Suddenly, if you start resolving from setups other than lines or waves, you vary the get-outs and you become less predictable. Everybody pass the ocean. Triple trade. Notice what happens to the 2 center guys. Plus list. Girls, yeah, thank you. Notice what happened to the 2 center guys. We maneuvered them out of that wave of 4 into the other wave of 4 across the center line of the square. Grand swing through and watch the 2 girls. They maneuver across the center line of the square. We keep rearranging the dancers by maneuvering them across the center line of the square with calls for formations that we normally don't resolve from. We can use more complex calls than just a simple fan the tops, touch a quarter, star throughs to maneuver dancers. It disguises the resolving pattern. It ends up varying the calls that we're using and ends up making ourselves more flexible in our approach. Boys, run around the girls, please. Good. Each line of 4, wheel and deal. Sweep a quarter, and you should find a corner at this point. Do an element left. Yeah. Promenade home. Heads, slide through, please. Good. Pass through. Slide through and pass the ocean. Spin, don't do this yet. Spin chain and exchange the gears does just exactly the opposite that spin chain through does. Instead of taking the 2 guys across, it stabilizes the 2 guys and brings everybody else in the ocean wave across the setup, which means it's the same effect as moving those 2 guys across. Spin chain and exchange the gears. I guess I should have added smoothly. Oh well. You can't have everything. What happened here was that we maneuvered the people together that we need necessary to resolve the square with a larger pattern call just as surely as we use the slide-throughs and touch quarters that Lee used. It involves researching the effect of each and every call for its relationship effect to the square. So we need to look and know our material, more than just the touch of quarters and the slide-throughs, but also learn what the other calls do to our setups. Swing through, please. Boys run around the girls. Resolves aren't always necessarily into right and left grands or element lefts. All the couples circulate once and a half. And just by maneuvering the dancers, everybody bend the line, and we should be home. So we can resolve into square sets. We could have just as easily had them partner traded and promenaded home. So mixing the resolves themselves, you once again disguise the patterns that you're utilizing. To me, there's nothing worse than being on a square dance floor and constantly dancing the same get-out. It takes away the lack of predictability that square dancing should have. I should be able to be given a call by a caller and then dance to the beat of the music. I should know where that caller is going for his final resolve because it takes the fun aspect out of it. It takes the surprise. It's like having the answers to a trivia contest down at the bottom of the page in bold print. There's no point for me to even try or make the effort, and I lose a certain aspect of fun out of the whole situation. They'll talk about pigeonholing. And to take that a step further, let's let the heads pair off, please. Good. Do a right and left through. Pass the ocean. I didn't want to be there. The one thing that you can do with the concept of pigeonholing is that's labeling positions and ideas with your own labels. The terminology that Bill invented was so that people could communicate about square dance terms in a written form, a written language. There's one form of the Chinese language that's written only. It's not meant for verbal communication. And Bill's whole thrust here was so that we could communicate by writing. But as far as your own efforts in sight calling, you need to come up with your own labels for spots on the floor and for positions. Everybody do a grand swing through. Boys run around the girls. Bend the line. Now, this is the spot where we normally would do a square through 3 to an element left. So that's the pigeonhole at this point. Now, what I then have is other things that fit into this pigeonhole scenario that are available from this position. I come up with other ways of resolving the setup. Everybody square through, and on the third hand, box the net. Now, we're in a position at this point to do a right and left grand. But part of the gamble that you can take as a sight caller, let's do a right and left through from here, with the girl courtesy turning the guy. I know that's not kosher, but stay with it. Okay. Now, at this point, let's say that we had done the scenario of square through and on the third hand box the net, and we had this result. It means we're out of sequence. So, just like NASA, I create backups for my pigeonhole. Okay? You come up with alternatives that if at this point in time it doesn't create the resolve, then the next call will create the resolve. So we had done the box and net. We would assume we were in a right and left grand. We made the wrong conclusion. Therefore, square through and on 3, do a right and left grand. 1, 2. And now we have a backup for the scenario. Please don't do the right and left grand. Promenade home, please. Good. So the real key is organizing yourself so that you can recognize numerous positions on the floor. Provide yourself with backups to the scenario in case it doesn't work. I have a series at C3 that I use that I really want to recognize 2 people to go into the scenario. If one call doesn't give me the right and left grand, the next call will. If that doesn't, the next call will. So that whole series of backups allow me to only have to identify several people for the right and left grand get out as opposed to having to identify all 4. I make choices there. Let's do this too. The heads lead to the right. Veer to the left. Good. Bend the line, do a right and left through, 2 ladies chain, and the side man and your girl roll away. You gotta take a look, Steve. Good. Everybody pass the ocean. Good choice. Now, Bill talked about in his arrangements that the major thrust was to go for a normal arrangement of dancers and then to go for a formation normalization, and then to go on for sequence and relationship. What I would like to encourage you to do by researching what the effects of the calls are is to do more than one thing at a time. If I had the 2 guys trade, I would get back into a more normal line structure. It would be half sashayed. But if I also have the 2 guys trade, I also pick up the rearrangement of their partner situation. Boys trade. Not only did I get into a more functional line of 4, but I also have put the 2 guys together with their girls. So I've actually accomplished 2 things at the same time. Box the net, and now I've normalized to the lines, and from here cross trail through, and you'll find the corner. What I did is that I took things out of, promenade home. Yeah. What I did is that I accomplished 2 things at the same time. What that does then is change the approach that you're taking to resolving, which means that you're not going to be as predictable in pursuing that in the future with the dancers. The real key to doing a lot of this is to know what the calls can do, to know what the equivalents to these calls can be able to manage that and arrange that, and all of that takes planning ahead of time. It takes doing and making the efforts like Lee suggested, as opposed to getting out on the floor and finding out what happens to a call after the dust clears by seeing what the dancers have given you. That leaves you at their control. The idea is to stay under your own control. And Bill Davis is going to summarize things in relationship with his... Oh, I thought Keith was...
What we're going to do now is give Mike and Lee and Bill a big hand. Okay? Let's give our square dancers a big hand, I guess. Thank you all. The thing that I kept hearing, I don't know if you're listening for buzzwords and key things, one was sight recognition, as I mentioned before. The other was research the material. sometimes I'm amazed by how we get by sometimes by calling square dances and not know if we call the particular move where it ends. Are we dependent on the dancers to do that for us? And sometimes I think we are. But I just sit down. You need to know where it starts, obviously. You need to know what it does and where it ends. And then who can dance it? That's an important part of it also. There was a comment coined in the executive meeting that I'd like to share with you, and then I'll turn it over for questions and answers. I hope I get this right. This was by Ken Ritucci. He said, the dancers don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's a tremendous buzzword, or a phrase that we could use. What I'd like to do now is just generally answer questions that you may direct to anyone or no one in particular, and we'll ask one of our experts give an answer. And I'll have to repeat the question, or you come to the mic. Any questions? Surely we got some questions about site calling, site resolution.
How many squares do these gentlemen able to keep track of, and how do they do it, and how do they tell us if one or two or three that they're watching them all broke down, or none of them, or one or what situation is that?
First of all, I'd like for you to, if your question is going to be lengthy, I can't remember the entire question, come to the microphone. I think what the gentleman is saying is, how many squares do you need to be able to watch? How do you know when you got them back where they belong, and so forth? Is that correct?
Not so much that as how do you know whether they're all right or whether they've made a mistake and you've been watching the rest of the floor?
Experience. I think in a lot of cases, that's a poor answer, but maybe Lee'd like to expound on it.
Before I call a tip at any level, I write down partners and corners in at least 3 sets. You'll see me, if I don't know the people at the dance, I write down all kinds of things which I really can't discuss with you here. But I make it a point to write down a square over here, a square in here, and I may one right in the back. I may not watch those 3 to begin with, but I can identify them because either I know them personally, I know their dancing abilities, or they have the same matching outfits. And then I'll probably cue in on a square right in front of me that I did not write down. Now, if the square breaks, then one of the reasons that you pick those things is you can scan the whole floor. I've seen lots of callers pick out a group to site call, focus on that group, and take their eyes off the rest of the floor, which is a real no-no. Because everybody wants to have your attention. And you'll be surprised, even though they're listening, they're looking up to see if you're watching them, how they perform, or whatever the case, or they're just looking to see what you look like, what you're dressed like, and, whatever the case. But you have to scan the whole floor. And if your pilot squares are breaking down, you can be sure that the rest of the floor is having a lot of trouble too. But I write down. I'm not ashamed to say it. What it does is it releases my another thing that I have to remember in terms of, well, I'm trying to choreograph you here, get you to this position, and so on. Then I also have to remember who your partner in corner is, and the square that I selected broke down. So it gives me a release of from that kind of tension. Does that answer your question? Okay.
To expand further, there's also, not only do I write down corners, and I'll even write down more, but the thing you need to develop, and it's a skill you can develop, is the usage of your peripheral vision. The peripheral vision can tell you when the square had problem. Not necessarily that you're focusing upon it, but by keeping your material smooth and danceable, the disruption that a square has when it has a problem will be something that your eye will naturally gravitate towards, and you'll know when to cancel them out as one of the people that you want to sight upon. It's that the natural flow of the whole floor moving together, and suddenly it's like seeing an object bobbing across on the ocean when that square makes a mistake, because it disrupts the very natural flow that the dancing has caused, and then you know that there's a problem over in that area. You'll know that they'll not be one of the choices you'll want to go to when you resolve.
Another thing that can happen is that when somebody breaks down and you cut something like, and Mike's point is very valid. You'll catch something that breaks down, you won't know for sure whether they fixed it or not, or whatever. Quite often, not all the time, but quite often you'll see, because you've got these people either written down or memorized, you'll see that particular square that you were going to resolve on is not symmetric. You know then that and that's one of the ways. That's not always going to happen, but that's one of the ways you can know. And in following up on that, you say, okay, they're not symmetric. Maybe only 2 of them are bad, though. And you might even go to the process of heading for your resolution, looking at the other squares that you didn't particularly memorize or write down. They've got some matching costumes. Get the other guys matched. Now go back to your pilot squares, if you will. And if they're matched too, you're in pretty good shape. If one of them's not matched, you can forget them. Now, if they're all unmatched, you got a lot of problems. You've got to go to some real fallback situation, but that happens so infrequently, really, gang, that I don't think you have to worry about that too much. Certainly not until you're into a very well-developed capability of doing site calling or site resolution. And in terms of part of the question was, how many do you watch and how many is appropriate? I think most guys try and go for about 3, but sometimes you can get by with 1. If you know that you've got clearly by a great measure, the best square on the floor, you might decide that they're enough. And then you can apply those other things in that situation. If they do break down, you can apply the other things. But so you might go with just 1. However, if you do go with just 1, you're probably, in my opinion, being a little lazy. So if you can only handle 1, then you certainly ought to be writing, like Lee says. You certainly ought to be writing down if you can only handle 1. If you can handle 3 or 4, like I've seen a lot of guys do, then you're probably in pretty good shape right there without writing.
I'd like to...
what was the question?
How many write down your corner? So there's nothing wrong with that, is there? Nothing at all. And fact is, I tell you what happens to me from time to time by doing beginner's lessons and doing advanced lessons and so forth. I don't write my corners down. I'm lucky and I can generally remember 3 sets well. But when I go into a strange place, how do you know who goes with who? You can't depend on the material that they're wearing to identify that. And you can't depend on your mental image of that set, and especially if those sets tend to blend with the crowd. So there's nothing wrong with writing it down. But I find I get lazy when I'm doing lessons and everything, and then I go out and do a dance, and I'm off and calling, and I didn't look at anyone. How many's been there? Then you got to match the folks up, right? If you don't remember what you've done, you don't know if, did I put them to the corner or the opposite? Do I have lines in, out, or where am I? And I seen a thing by Al Stevens. He said, there's one thing for sure. He said, if I get in a lot of trouble and compare everybody up, you can always get everybody, at least 2 couples paired up and dive in the center and make a right-hand star, that type of thing, and find your corner. But I find that if they're paired up, that one person's got a tough time getting over the corner because everybody else got theirs. Another question?
Actually, just to build upon what you were talking about, is put it in perspective, too. We're talking 1 sequence. You do 10 sequences or so every tip. You do 8 tips a night. We're talking 1 sequence out of 80. So you go down in flames. You have the wrong corner. Big deal. Your career is not going to be based upon that 1 sequence. Don't drive yourself nuts. You've done enough of that already. Trying to learn how to call, trying to learn how to site call, trying to handle all the other different scenarios. Don't crucify yourself for 1 mistake. Remember, in baseball, they put people in the Hall of Fame for only getting 3 out of 10 things right.
I'm glad you said that. I feel a lot better already.
You're already in the Hall of Fame.
We're all Hall of Famers, aren't we? Yes, sir. There's various ways. There's been some material that's written that takes a page and a half to tell you how to do it exactly. I've seen the case where the head boys can go into the middle and make a right-hand star and come back by the left, pick up your corner with an arm around. That girl pick up your corner, or pick up your partner with an arm around. That girl pick up your corner, and she picks up her partner, and everybody, you can get out by then backing out and make a line. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Best one is just square back up.
I screwed up. I seen a very famous caller from Abilene, Texas do that. He was calling and somebody said something, or a lovely lady walked in front of him or something, and he kind of screwed up. And he tried to get out of it, and finally he said, "Oh, just square up." And he said, "I screwed up." And he wouldn't want to do that all evening long, but there is some material in the note services that'll tell you how to get out of that. But I suggest, and this has only come because I started doing some seminars and doing what these guys have been doing for a long time, doing some caller seminars, that I got my checkers back out, if you will, and started becoming acquainted with the real world again. And I've came up with some choreography that I'm proud of, that I did myself and didn't have to steal somebody else's. And maybe put yourself in that situation, and sit there and look at those checkers and say, what if I did this? Would this resolve what my problem is, or whatever? You'll be surprised. You can see it a lot quicker, and there's no demand on your time to get it done instantly like it is when you're calling.
There really isn't too much of a shortcut in learning how to deal with this. Just like you expect your dancers to learn the language of square dancing, you as a caller have to learn the language of the calls themselves. And this is my 35th year of calling, and I work with checkers every day, but I'm dealing with, for the most part, with advanced and the challenge dancing, and the dancing has to be prepared, written, and we actually read it at some of our dances. But you just have to study it. You put your checkers down, you put them into what we said before, the lines of 4. Say, well, if I did a wheel and deal, where would they be? And memorize those pictures. If the head's star through, I know I can square through 3. Those are the formations that you're going to eventually resolve your square to. And they're familiar to you, and you'll be able to get them to the Alaman left. But if you know that if the lines of 4 pass through and you wheel and deal, where 2 is in relation to 1, well, let me throw this out to you, see if you were really paying attention to us today. If you have lines of 4, you pass through, and this is 1P, 2P. You pass through, you wheel and deal, and the centers do a right and left through. Where is 1 in relation to 4? Are they behind them? Okay. If you zoom, where is 1 in relation to 4? Can you square through 3 to an Alaman there? Because they didn't interchange girls. Now, if you can think that quickly, you're on the right track. Now, if you can't think that quickly, it doesn't take much to study just that particular sequence. And say, all right, the 1P, 2P, you pass through, you wheel and deal, I know 2's in front of 1. If I zoom, I'll have 1 in front of 2. If I rezoom, I'll have 2 back in front of 1. And if I do a right and left through, I'll have 1 behind number 4. So these are the little things that I think are the most important. Rather than take the time to memorize long sequences, which your dancers eventually will memorize, you can do a lot more by memorizing just a picture and trying to deal with that picture. And the way you practice how you can deal with that picture is to have those 2 couples, and like I had showed you before, and start to deal with it so you can spit this stuff out quickly.
More questions? I got a question for you. What if you're doing a singing call and your record skips? Okay? But it's skipping at the same beat. And you reach in your pocket and you get a quarter and you put it down on the record and it takes off. Can you finish the singing call and also catch the right person back? Happened to me last weekend. First 3 tips at the Alabama Jubilee. It about killed me. But I was able to do it. And the only reason I think to this day that I was able to do it, because I have a group of dancers on Tuesday nights that's about every tip's like that. We're a workshop group, and I was able to do it. Thank goodness. One time they didn't even know the record was skipping. They just thought it was a long figure. And to make matters worse, Jerry Haig came up the next day and did Saturday night with us, and we put his record on, which was Alabama Jubilee, right? His record, not mine. Mine been skipping. Guess who was singing when his record skipped? Yep, it's me again. So they had it in for me, and I'll not be doing the Alabama Jubilee no more, but I learned how to get out of the singing calls. Yes, sir. I have to tell you, I'm proud of it. You ask your callers, it was there. Right there's one that was there, sitting in the front row. I got out of it every time, didn't I? Every time. Yes, and I got out of it because of what these gentlemen have told me before. And I went home and got my checkers out and worked on it. It was easy. Really, it was. I knew what I wanted to do. The record just wasn't cooperating. So I did what I call zeros and equals till I got the record going where I wanted it to again, and I recognized what I ought to be doing, and I did it. It works. We got about 12 minutes. Well, you guys must have did a tremendous job. They don't have no questions at all. There's nothing wrong with leaving early.
Yeah, not a question, just a comment. Did you have a new Hilton?
No, it was an older model Hilton.
Oh, okay. I recently bought a new one and had to put a little bit more weight on the needle. And I was talking to the Hilton people, and he said since I bought that new 300 that they have put a little more weight on the needle. I found quite a few of my records were skipping it first until I put more weight. And just a comment, if any of you got the new cartridge.
300B, okay.
The
new cartridge. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, with the new cartridge, he's got a little lighter weight on that, and he's since gone back to, you may want to take an Allen wrench, put just a smidgen more weight on your needle, and you may not have that problem. But
thanks, Jerry. Okay. You got a question?
Yeah.
All right.
If I hear what you're saying, you're going back to the mental image or mental imagery to a certain extent and combining that with sight. For a caller who only calls once or twice a week, it's very difficult to develop a good sight calling method and stay on it because you don't have enough practice to use it. Where mental image, I was the fellow that made the comment this morning, but when you do that, those figures, if you're mental imaging, you know where your dancers are all the time, and you can call a much smoother dance than trying to sight the people out of that dance and just use isolated sight at different times. I've heard a lot of new callers say, well, I can't remember things, so I just depend on sight. And you stop-go all evening because they're doing what you're saying or what people have been teaching over the last 10 years, which says stop and go or wait till you see what the call does and then move through it. Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying?
I don't adhere to that, and I don't propose that. I think if you're going to be a sight caller, you should know where the movement starts and where it ends and what it does.
I agree.
And be prepared for the next call before it's done.
And mental image is part of that.
I'm sorry, I don't want to step on anybody's toes here, but there's really only three methods of calling. There's using written material, there's memorizing, and then there's using a systemized, knowledgeable approach. And we call these labels all kinds of different systems. We call it sighting, we call it mental image. It's all the same ballgame. And most of it is just a progression of how much do we leave crutches behind, how much do we end up having support so we don't end up being embarrassing ourselves, and to what point do we finally gamble towards. And that's what the systemized, knowledgeable approach is. Everything, and basically it all falls in that category. We can call it all kinds of different names, but it's the same animal. And so just because we look at the camel from one side and the camel from the other side, it's still a camel.
Or how many times do you go into a new area where your first tip is you almost know everything that's going on for the entire tip. You know how far you are away from your corner, or you know, well, if all I got to do here is a slide through and we can Alaman left. If the floor's having tough time understanding me or dancing to me, I know this will resolve the square. How many does that? You know, when you first go into an area, you may not know the people until you get used to them. But I've went back to doing. I write down the corners when I know I'm going to have trouble. I write it down because I don't want to be forced to that. But that's where I. Do we have another question over here? Okay, let's take a little break, and there'll be another session here. Thank you all very much for coming. I hope you had a good time. Thank you, sir. That's good.